Hey guys, kinggath here with Bethesda Mod School. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you some of the very basics of XEdit. It's also often known as FO4Edit, XEdit, etc. Essentially, XEdit is a program that allows you to edit or create plugin files for Bethesda's games. And the nice thing about it is that it's a lot faster and tends to be more stable than the creation kit. So it's a great option for certain types of plugins. It's a really great option for editing existing plugins. So I'm going to show you how to get it set up on your computer, how to create a basic plugin in it, and how to make some basic edits to an existing plugin. So that should give you kind of the ropes, and then you won't feel quite as intimidated by it because it's a very powerful program. And if you get sick of the CK crashing, it can be a nice way to handle certain things. It's also a fantastic automation tool. So for any of you out there who are programmers, you can do Pascal scripting to create, to do a lot of things automatically. And there are some things we'll cover when we get to the Sim Settlements series in the Builder's Toolkit. We'll cover some methods you can use to speed up creating building plans. So it'll be useful for those of you pursuing the add-on pack route as well. But it's just a very useful tool all around. So you're going to want this in your toolkit if you plan on modding long term. So the first thing we need to do, obviously, is get this thing installed. Now, there's a couple of ways you can install it. I recommend for most of you, if you're here watching this 101 video, that you just head to the Nexus Mods page and download it from there because you don't have to do anything special. If you're more of the developer type and you're comfortable with things like GitHub, you can actually get the latest release on the XEdit page. And when you do that, one of the things to note is that after you download it, the actual exe needs to be renamed for the game. It's all explained inside of the README file that comes with it, but I end up using the GitHub page just because I like to grab different experimental releases occasionally to try out new features. But I would recommend for most of you following this video to just head to the Nexus page, go to the Files tab, and click on Manual Download. And this will just come with a .7z file, which you can get 7-zip for free at, I believe it's 7zip.org, and please don't be porn. Let's see here. Yeah, 7zip.org. You can download that for free, and that'll allow you to extract that particular file. So we're going to let that download, and then we're going to head into our downloads folder here. And once this finishes, you just extract that out, and you can actually run XEdit from anywhere you like. Personally, I set up a directory on one of my drives that's called Fallout 4 mod files, and I stick all sorts of programs and files I'm working on there that aren't stored in my Fallout 4 data folder just to keep it all organized. So we're going to go ahead and extract this here. So extract to FO4Edit. And like I said, you can just run this from anywhere, so you can move this folder anywhere you want. I'm going to just run it right out of here for the sake of this particular tutorial. So you're going to find in there that there are multiple exe files. The first one, the first exe, FO4Edit.exe, that's the one you're going to be using. Quick auto clean, we'll go over that in a future tutorial. That's a very useful thing that you should get used to doing on your mods before you release them. It essentially makes sure that any accidental edits that you've done get removed from there so that you're not releasing what we call dirty plugins. And a dirty plugin might be, for example, if you were playing around looking at a world space and you accidentally moved an item, that can break something called pre-combines, which can cause people's FPS to tank really hard. So it's really important you do this, but we're not going to cover that in this particular video. I would highly recommend that any of you who get into FO4Edit after we're done with this tutorial and you want to learn more, to click on this up at the top here inside of FO4Edit on the latest version on 4.02 plus, and obviously latest version being at the time I'm recording this. There's a videos button here. Those are by Gamer Poets. He does fantastic tutorials. I would highly recommend you go through some of those if you want to learn more about FO4Edit. I will continue to touch on this topic over time, but it'll most likely be within the frame of trying to do something specific as opposed to just general tutorials. This particular tutorial I'm doing more generic just to give you guys something to get started with, so something to get you a feel for the program and how things generally work. So the first thing we're going to see when we open up FO4Edit is a list of all of the mods that you have in your data directory. So it doesn't even have to do necessarily with the ones you're using. This is just everything that is currently in your data directory, and you'll notice that some of them are checked in and some are not. If they're ones that you used in your last play session, they will have a check in them. Otherwise, they will not. So if you wanted to, you could technically load up your entire load order, and that's sometimes something worth doing when you're creating patches, but that's not what we're going to cover in this video. In this video, we're going to start with creating a new plugin. So what we're going to do is we're going to just open up the Fallout4.esm because that's what we're going to edit. Now, there's a couple of things to note about this particular screen. One is that if you want to check in multiple plugins, you want to first right-click anywhere and hit Select None, and then just put a check mark in them. At any time, you can filter, so if you have trouble finding one, so for example, if I wanted to make an edit to Sim Settlements, I can find it a little easier by starting to type in the word Sim Settlements up top there, and if you clear out the filter, it will just show everything. And note that the order these are presented in is the same as your load order, so it's the order that you have these mods activated in the game, and sometimes that can be a confusing order, and you can sort them. So if you click on these different headings up here, so I can sort them by file name, that's a great way to find them, but by default they will be sorted by load order, so that's the order that your game is going to be actually loading these up in. So for the sake of our tutorial, we're just going to use Fallout4.esm. Now, one shortcut you can use is if you're only going to be editing one plugin. So if you just want to make an edit to something, or if you're just going to make a new mod that's requiring only the base game stuff, you can just double click on the file. And then, so for example, if we had all this other stuff checked in, if we double click on any one, it will ignore all those things we have checked in. So when you load in by default, you saw that I had all those different things checked in. That's my last play session. And for those of you who want a little more technical detail, it's everything that's in your plugins.txt file that has a little asterisk next to it. And plugins.txt file is something we might cover one day. I don't know how useful it is because most of us probably use a mod manager to handle that file. But anyway, you can either select the ones you want and press OK here, or just double click if you're only going to load one plugin. In the case of this tutorial, we just want to load the Fallout4.esm, which is the plugin that runs the main game files. This is a good one to use because you don't have to worry about players without DLC being unable to use your mod. So if you want to guarantee that every player can use your plugin, it's best to just stick with just this. Obviously, if you need to make some tweaks to things that are in the DLC, or if you want to use assets from DLC, you'll have to use those corresponding DLC. I tend to prefer to never require DLC. There are a lot of tricks you can use to make use of those assets for players who have them, and I'll definitely cover that in future tutorials, but that's a very advanced topic, so that'll be way down the line. All right, so go ahead and let's just double click on Fallout4.esm. And you'll get this little tip screen, and you can read about some interesting stuff. I would recommend keeping this on and doing that because there's all sorts of new stuff that you can learn from that. And because there's a little bit of a load time in the background, it's nowhere near as excruciatingly long as the creation kit, but it is there. There is a load time. And if you start messing with, and this is a very important, so I'm going to slow down here, very important. If you were to start editing a plugin before this is finished loaded and you save, there's a very, very strong chance it will zero out your plugin and ruin it. So just don't do it. Just wait for this loading to finish. I would not be shocked if this current version of XEdit prevents that from happening. It might be an old bug I'm thinking of that could cause that to happen. But Eleminster, I believe he was the original creator of XEdit, is back on the case as of the last few months, and he's been very actively developing the XEdit software and adding new features and just making it better. I highly recommend supporting him on Patreon if you've got the funds to do so, because he is directly responsible for the existence of many mods, because not only is the creation kit a crashing nightmare sometimes, but there are certain mods that would just be too difficult to develop. For example, there's no way we could have done Rise of the Commonwealth without XEdit originally. Like, we've since created a new method to do it that doesn't require it, but originally when we designed Rise of the Commonwealth, we could not have done it without FO4Edit or XEdit, and I think there are a lot of mods that fall in that same boat. So Eleminster is an awesome guy, and he has been back, I wouldn't say full-time, but he's very actively developing it. So at the time, 4.02 is the latest. It's very likely by the time you watch this video later down the line, if you come back to this, that there will be a much newer version, and some of the things I'm showing you might have changed. So if you find that there are any discrepancies, definitely send me a message to let me know, and I'll try and update this. And also I would check out this videos button for Gamer Poet's latest videos, because he is pretty active with creating tutorials. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to create the most basic plugin that I think a lot of you would be interested in, and that's going to be a weapon balance patch. So I'm going to just do something very simple, but I'll get you guys started so you know how to get going on this. So you'll see that there are two files over here, and these are the plugin and exe. I don't know any reason you would ever mess with this exe. Somebody more advanced in FO4Edit might be able to tell you what this would be useful for. That's not me. I tend to only use FO4Edit for simple edits that I don't want to wait for the creation kit. Like, for example, renaming things, I might use it for. But I tend to generally use it for doing scripted things. So if I want to make a whole bunch of changes at once, I'll use XEdit. So I am not the foremost expert on it, which is, again, why I keep pointing you to these Gamer Poets videos, because he is much more advanced in it than I am. And I believe he works closely with the XEdit team, which is why he has his own button in the program now. All right, so we're going to click on this little plus sign, and this will expand the different types of records that you'll find in this particular plugin. So this is very similar to the object window in the creation kit, but some of the things are named a little differently. For example, actor, that subcategory is actually named NPC in here. And so it can take a little, or non-player character, excuse me. So occasionally if you find that you can't locate a category you're used to finding in the creation kit, just kind of sort through and dig down and you'll find it eventually. They just have slightly different names occasionally. But basically the names on these are based on something called the group, and there's a little four-letter code for each one that's actually stored in, and those come from within the file format. So getting real down deep, if you were to open this up in like a hex editor, you would find all these little mentions of these four character codes, and that's where they got the names for some of these. Like for example, NPC underscore, I believe, is the name of the one for actors, and that's why they've called it non-player character. So it depends. That's where that's coming from. So yeah, the group signature is NPC underscore. So that's not relevant for you to know, but those little terms are occasionally helpful just when we want to communicate with each other, or you might stumble upon them in other people's tutorials. So I remember in school I always got annoyed with obsession with terminology that teachers would have, but I've long gotten over that as I understand how useful it is to just communicate big ideas a little faster. So I'm going to try and do right by that and talk about those occasionally. All right, so let's scroll down to something that we want to edit for this particular type. So we want to do a weapon. We're going to do some damage changes because I think that's something a lot of people might like to do. It's something simple. You can build this mod very, very fast, and it has a big effect, and you can see it in game right away. So one thing to note with the way the sorting is done by default in XEdit is you'll see that there's a little up arrow here next to form ID. The form ID is this hex code. It's not particularly useful for most people. It is useful to know because the hex code is something that's unique, and then on a file basis, it's very important. And when you start talking about load order stuff, form ID becomes very, very important. But for the sake at this level, we're at the 101 level, we don't care about that. So we're going to sort by editor ID. So you can just click on this, and that will essentially sort these editor IDs alphabetically, which is what you might expect for sorting. Now, these editor IDs, when we've been working in the creation kit so far in the other tutorials, those would be the first thing, that unique ID that I always tell you to prefix. That's kind of what these are right here. Well, that's exactly what these are. So we're going to find a weapon we want to edit. So I'm going to edit a particular weapon that I know I have in my Let's Play that we can see the effect on, so I can go in game and show you, and that's the machete. That's one of the weapons I've been using a lot of. So we're going to start with this. So to start your own plugin, and now keep in mind this particular tutorial, this part of the tutorial, I'm assuming that you're starting a fresh plugin. I will show you how to load up your plugin afterward and edit it, but I'm going to assume you're creating a fresh plugin here. So you'd find the thing you want to edit. So in this case, we want to edit our machete, and we're going to create copy as override into, and you right click to get this menu here. So a lot of this stuff, so like I said, XEdit is a very deep and complicated program, but I'm trying to just show you a few little things to make this less intimidating. So don't worry about all this, just focus on what I'm showing you. We might start covering some of this as it's necessary for my tutorials, and if you want to learn more, like I said, Gamer Poets has got plenty of information he can share with you. There's also a very exhaustive wiki available on the GitHub page for XEdit, which I will try and remember to link in the description below. All right, so we're going to hit copy as override into. No matter what you do, the first time you try and edit anything in FO4Edit or XEdit, it is going to give you this warning, and it's basically making sure that you know what you're doing. So you're going to hit yes, I'm absolutely sure, and you might get a timer. So I believe, and I don't know if that's still the case in the current version, but basically it used to be, and maybe it is for new people to the program, is the first time you load it, it gives you like excuse me, like a 5 or 10 second timer before you're allowed to press that confirm button, and then that timer gets less and less each time. And I think it was just trying to reduce the number of complaints that were coming in about people ruining their own games and stuff. And so that's that. I don't know if that's still in the current version, or if because I've used the program so many times I've gotten past the timer, or it could also be I am a contributor. Maybe it doesn't show up because I'm logged in as my Patreon. I have no idea whether that thing's still there, but if you see a timer before you can press that button, that's pretty normal. All right, so now what will happen is if you had other plugins loaded, they would show up here as an option. And essentially when you create an override, so I guess this requires a little bit of understanding of how plugins work. So I'm going to back up a little bit here before we continue. So I'm going to load up Vortex to just show you an example of how this works. And we're going to go ahead and close or delete out these filters. So here you can see my Let's Play load order. Now, the way plugins work is that the first one, let's sort these by load order to make it simpler. So the first one that loads in, all of the records from that particular plugin will be used to start. Then the next plugin, if it has an override, which is what we just talked about creating, as an override for a particular record. So let's pretend that DLC Robot, which is the Automatron DLC, had an override that changes the machete. Since it's lower in the load order, its record would override that same record from Fallout4.esm. So that's why load order ends up being very important, because if multiple plugin files or multiple mods are editing the same record, the very last one in the list is the one that will get used. So that's important to know here. So in this case, we're going to create ourselves a new plugin, but if you had multiple plugins loaded in here, you're creating an override in that plugin, and then you would need to make sure that it was low enough in the load order so that any other record that was also altering it, yours would take precedent by being later in the load order. Now, this is one of those things where programs like Loot and the Vortex auto sort option take care of things for you so that you don't have to go into, your 200 plugins and try and figure out which ones are editing which records. They will try and figure it out. And then, for example, Vortex, when you do it, if it detects multiple plugins editing the same record, it will provide you an opportunity to choose which one you want to prioritize. And so that's kind of a useful feature there. But for our sake, we're not worried about it because we're going to just create a new file here. So you have a couple of different options here. There's actually 6 different options. I'm going to go over what each of them is. So the most standard one you will probably use is an ESP file. An ESP is just a standard plugin. They load in order from top down. The next option is a little more complicated. This is an ESP with the ESM flag tagged. These are useful for editing other people's mods. So for example, let's say you've got a bunch of different plugins and you want to make a patch for them. This is a good option because you can basically take those other people's plugins and turn them into an ESM. And an ESM just means it's a master file. We're getting into a little confusing territory. If you don't follow this stuff, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and select the ESP. But I just want to go over this roughly because it's useful to know. So the ESM flag means that other plugins can use your plugin as a parent. So if you remember in some of our earlier tutorials, if hopefully you've gone through some of them, such as the CK101, we parented our mod to the Fallout4.esm. And that just means that your plugin can reference some of the forms in that other plugin. So if you don't have it as a parent, you can't reference those records. So if you, for example, loaded up another ESP mod and started creating overrides for their forms, if they didn't have this ESM flag, every time you loaded your mod back into the creation kit, it would lose track of all those records and they would get disconnected. And that will be a problem. You'd basically break your mod every time you tried to edit it. And so like that ESM flag allows you to have other mods loaded with them. ESL is similar in that this ESP with the ESL flag is similar to this. The difference is that the ESL is a special type of mod I'm sure many of you are familiar with now. This was added to the game by Bethesda when Creation Club came out, and ESLs are basically tinier files. They're limited in the number of these form records they can have. I believe it's about 4,000 records, if I remember correctly, that they can have, which is good enough for most mods. There are a couple of caveats with ESLs. One is that you have to do a compacting with your forms, and what that basically means is, so you'll see here that these forms all have what seem to be random form ID numbers. And the way that the ESL format works is it can only use up to 4,000, and that's in hex. So if you don't understand how hex counting works, imagine if instead of going 1 to 10 before you start with 1 again. So right now when you count, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then you do 11, which is basically, you're kind of starting over with 1 again because you have 11, which is 10 plus 1, 12 is 10 plus 2, 13 is 10 plus 3, etc. So you keep starting over counting with 1 again every 10. With hex, you do the same thing, but it's every 16, and instead of making up 6 new characters, it uses the letters A through F. It's very confusing if you're not comfortable with math, so don't worry about that. But basically, the point is that in this format of hexadecimal with letters involved in it, you can have 4,000 records. So the first record would be 0000001, and I might have not said enough 00. It would be 7 zeros. Then the next record would be that number of zeros 2, 3, etc., they have to be the first 4,000. So the form IDs that the creation kit will generate, I believe they're generated randomly. And I could be totally off on that, but I know they're not generated in order. So maybe somebody could correct me if they understand the order that it creates them in. But in an ESL file, they all have to be within those first 4,000 entries. So you have to do this thing called compacting, which resets all the form IDs. Now, the problem with that is that if you were to release your ESL file out to the world and you let other players start using it, and then later you made changes and you compact it again, it could change the form IDs of your existing forms. Now, the problem with that is that if a player updated your plugin after you changed a form ID, it would almost certainly crash their game. It's a big problem. And so essentially, you make your plugins so that they're very difficult for you to edit. You tend to have to do all your edits in XEdit because it has methodology for you to do things manually, and you can fix your form IDs, whereas in the creation kit, you can't. So that's what the purpose of the ESL format. And once again, I know I'm going very deep here, and if you aren't interested in all this, you can skip ahead. I'm sure somebody will post a skip ahead link to get past all of this stuff. But again, because we're at this stage, we're looking at all this stuff, and I want you guys to not have confusion about what all this stuff is. I do want to cover it. All right, so then the next format, ESP with both ESM and ESL flags. I honestly have no idea what the use of this is for. I'm sure someone has come up with some sort of use for it, so I'm not even going to talk about it yet because I don't have enough information to give you. .esm, this is the format something like Sim Settlements uses. This is a mod that's designed to be heavily edited by other mods, to have constant things adding stuff to it, and it tends to be that you will only use these for framework type mods. So things like AWKCR, Sim Settlements, Workshop Framework, these are the type of mods that are designed to be these ESM files where you assume other mods are going to make them a master file and make edits to them. That's what this ESM format is for. And then lastly, we've got straight up .esl, and this is the format that Bethesda introduced that we just talked about in depth. So the difference between the .esl and the .esp flagged as ESL has to do with the load order. So by default, you can only put at the top of your load order ESMs and ESL files. They have to load up before ESPs. So the ESP flagged with ESL is a special trick. This allows your plugin to be sorted differently. It doesn't have to be sorted near the top like the ESL, but it still counts as an ESL file, and that's useful because by default, and if any of you who originally played on Xbox, you know you have a limit of 150 mods, and the ESL format gets around that limit. For PC players, the limit is 254 plugins, and again, ESL does not count toward that limit. There's a technical limit of the number of ESL files, but it's literally thousands of them, I believe. So, and somebody else will be able to correct me with the exact number, but it's so many that it's unlikely most of you will ever reach that realistically. I'm sure there's some crazy out there who's trying real hard to reach it, or if you used enough tiny ESL files, I guess you could theoretically hit it, but realistically those should be merged together into plugin patches. So the idea with the ESP ESL is if you want to make a mod so it doesn't take up a mod slot, but also can be sorted lower in your load order. That's the purpose of this. So for our case, and for those of you who are waiting for all that or decided to skip ahead, you'll be jumping in back right about now. We're going to just double click ESP. We just want to keep this real simple. All right, so the next thing you're going to get is you're going to be asked to name your file. So this is where you don't put in the .esl, .esp. You're just going to come up with a name. So I'm going to just call this KG Test Weapon Balance Patch. And let's try spelling correctly here, and we'll hit OK there. All right, so now you'll see that some stuff changed here. So first on the left, you'll notice that Machete and the form ID there are green. That's telling you that the current plugin has an override for that particular form. And then on the right here, you'll see a new column appeared with the name of our new plugin. Now, right now, everything is this light green color, which means that it's the same as the master file. So in reality, right now, our plugin doesn't need to exist because it hasn't done anything that would cause this override to matter. And so if you ran a clean, an auto clean, it would likely remove this record because this is an unnecessary record right now. It's not doing anything. So we need to, we want to do something here. So in our case, we're going to go something really simple, and we're going to just change the damage. So there's a lot of data here. And this is why I tend to recommend that new people who are trying to mod stick with the creation kit, because it hides a lot of this stuff. So most of this stuff here is unavailable in the creation kit. And this is the deep, deep data. This is all the stuff that is actually used by the game, but isn't displayed by the creation kit because most people don't ever need to use it. But there are occasions occasional uses to get into and edit some of these weird fields that you might not otherwise. So we're going to go ahead and hide some of the stuff that we're unlikely to need at this point. So you can hide these things by just collapsing them. So we're not going to need to edit the record header or the object bounds. In this case, we're not going to edit the model file. We're not going to edit the keywords, so we're going to just collapse these things that we don't want. Object templates are something complex that I'll likely cover in the future because they're very, very cool, very useful, but not for this first tutorial. We're going to collapse down until we're at the dnam data field, because this is where most of the information about how the weapon functions is stored. So we're going to scroll down here, and what I would recommend you guys do is just test this stuff out. Is just play with them, make a change, go in game, save it, go in game, and see what happens, and you'll slowly learn what all these different fields do. Some of them seem to be unused or are probably only useful in combination with edits to other things. For example, if you were to change the speed, it has no effect on the thing in the game. It's likely that this is a field that was left behind from older days, because you got to remember that this engine, these ESM files, /ESP files, etc., these were designed many years ago for earlier Elder Scrolls games, and it's been upgraded over time, and they tend to just leave in fields. I believe now the speed is actually controlled by the animations stored in the actual the weapon files. So in the HKX animation files, I believe that's how it's controlled. So I don't think this actually has any effect. I could be mistaken on that, but we're going to just stick to editing something I 100% know will have an effect, and that's going to be the damage. So you could see, for example, if you wanted to make everything weightless, you could come into here, and to edit a field, you're going to just double click it. So we're going to change our damage base on our weapon here, and you can just double click it and it'll allow you to edit it. Occasionally, instead of it popping up right there, it might be that it pops up a pop-up box for you to edit. Or if this is the first thing you had clicked on and you hadn't done what I did where I created an override in this particular form, it might pop up and give you that warning now about editing. Anytime the first time after you load XEdit you try and edit anything, you're going to get that prompt confirming you to press that big green checkbox that says you know what you're doing. All right, so in our case, we're going to take the damage base for our weapon, and we're going to just crank it up to ridiculous levels. So we're going to just go ahead and put 100 in here, and we're going to press enter, and you'll see that now it gets that dark green, which means that there's an actual edit to this particular override, so that this override wouldn't get wiped out if we were to do a clean, because it's not duplicate. It's not duplicate to the master file. It's not exactly the same as the file that we got the override from. So now we've edited our weapon to 100. We'll go ahead and change the weight to 0 too, so you can see that that works. Just so we have two things. You could change the cell value here. Again, all this stuff is worth playing around with. Action point costs, that's an easy one to understand. Try playing with them, see if they have an effect on the game. What I would recommend you do if you edit one and you find that you can't figure out what the effect is, you restore it to what it was. And there are a couple of ways you can restore it. You can either just manually type it in, or you can actually grab onto a field under the original column. So I could grab onto this too and just drag it over across to your plugin, and it'll just restore it back to the default, which is a nice little handy feature, especially for more complicated things that you get into later. If you start getting into changing things like sound files or model files, rather than having to figure out how to type that in, which is a real pain in the butt, just being able to drag and drop is nice. So that's all we're going to do for this particular edit, but I do want to show you a few more things while we're in this software. So for one is, right now we've got this interesting layout here because we're in the Fallout 4.esm, but I want to also show you what your new plugin looks like in this left side of the window. So if we scroll all the way up to the top here and collapse this Fallout 4.esm, you'll see that there's now a new file at the bottom. That's the new plugin that we just created. If you expand this, and this is another one of those interesting things that's advantageous and makes XEdit more useful than the creation kit sometimes, is that when you expand this, you'll see that it only has the records that are actual existing in our particular plugin. So you'll know from any of the creation kit tutorials you've done for me so far that once you load up your plugin in the creation kit, everything in the game is still there that you've got to filter through, and it can be very difficult to figure out which stuff you've actually done. And that's why I push for that prefix, making sure that anytime you create a new record, you add a prefix. Now, in the case of actual edits, so if you're doing a plugin that has an edit, you can't really do that. You shouldn't be editing these editor IDs by adding prefixes, although technically you could. It's just not advised for various reasons. I wouldn't recommend editing vanilla things. If your goal is just to edit features of a plugin where you're making some sort of overhaul mod or a patch, or you're just making something for yourself, you wouldn't be renaming these editor IDs for the vanilla items, and it can be difficult to then remember which ones you've edited within the creation kit, whereas in FO4Edit, if you open your plugin, you can very quickly see, because only the records you've edited or created will show up in this list. So if you notice, if I click on this, I get the exact same data on the right as I did from when I was in here. And that's useful to know if you're coming back in to edit one of your existing plugins, is it's much easier to find your records in here than to dig through the gigantic list that is the fallout4.esm file. And you'll get the exact same data, and you can do the exact same things. You can make the same edits. So if I wanted to tweak the weight here again, I can do it exactly the same as if I was on that other screen. It just has to do with which column that you're editing things in. All right, so there's a couple of things to know here. One is if you want to save your plugin, you can do it from this menu here. You can just hit Save or Control S. Or when you go to exit FO4Edit, which is what we're going to do now because I want to be able to show you how to load your plugin for edits later, you can close this out and you're going to get a Saved Change Files option. And if you only edited your own plugin by doing things like creating overrides, that will be here. Or if you had made any tweaks to other mods that you had loaded, those will be on this list too. And it's a good idea to any of them, especially for vanilla files, to uncheck them. So if you uncheck any of the files that appear here, they won't get saved. So that's a good way to ensure you don't accidentally edit a file you don't want. I would also recommend you check in this backup plugins option, which will create a backup of your plugin. So if you do something stupid, basically, or accidental, you'll be able to roll back to before you made those changes. So this is something good to keep in. I am a risk taker, and I've been using this long enough where I trust myself not to break anything, and I tend to be in the habit. I am such a nervous wreck about breaking a live plugin that I tend to make backups on the cloud of all of my mods before I ever do any tweaks in XEdit. So I've already got another backup of this. So I have this unchecked, but I would recommend you guys check this in. And this will just create an alternate version of the plugin that's date stamped so that you can roll back if you need to. So we're going to go ahead and hit OK, and this will simultaneously close XEdit and also save the plugin we just created. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and load into the game, and I can show you that the damage has gone up and the weight has been changed. And those are the two changes we made. All right, so we're in game. We've got my trusty machete out, and you can look at the stats here. And obviously, it's going to be hard for you to tell that the damage increased because this is a legendary version. But no, the damage did increase substantially. I can tell you that from my own playing. But you can see here that the weight is 0. So the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to pop back into XEdit, and I'm going to show you how you can add additional edits, because you can definitely use one plugin to edit as many different weapons as you like. And this is definitely useful for those of you who want to try something out and get an immediate impact. Maybe you want to rebalance the weapon game in your own image of what you think each of the weapons should have for their various damage levels and things like that. All right, so now we're going to launch FO4Edit once again. And we're going to scroll down all the way to the bottom, and we should find our plugin file there. Yep, we'll just go ahead and double click on that. And one thing to note is when you double click on a plugin that isn't the fallout4.esm, any of the files that yours requires, so in this case ours requires the fallout4.esm, will also be loaded automatically. So it's a really useful feature to just do that double click so that you don't have to go managing all those check marks. All right, so if we expand this, you'll see that our same records are still available. Now, let's say we want to add another weapon. Let's say we're going to go ahead and tweak some more weapon damage. We just scroll down just like we did before, find the weapon category. Let's do some more melee weapons. We'll go ahead and edit the baseball bat. So once again, we do the same thing, copy as override into. And again, you always get that warning the first time after loading FO4Edit. Say, yes, I'm absolutely sure. And this time, instead of choosing the new file, you can actually choose your existing file since you have it loaded. We'll go ahead and hit OK. And once again, we get the option to edit here. And if we were to collapse Fallout 4, whoop, there we go. If you collapse that, you'll see that also appears under your plugin there. And we can make the same sorts of edits. So if we collapse down some of this stuff and we get down to our DNAM data, and we'll just up the damage here. And you can go ahead and continue to make tweaks to as many weapons as you want like that, and that will be a great way to make a weapon patch. And you can do that with anything. It's not limited to weapons, obviously. Any record you want, you can right-click it, do a copy as override into, and you basically can make tweaks directly. In a future video, I'll likely cover how you can create new records in here, because you don't have to just create new records in the creation kit. But for those of you who are starting out modding, the creation kit is definitely the easier way to go. Again, the nice thing about using FO4Edit to do edits like this, to do simple edits like this, is it's just a faster program. It's much more stable. You don't have to worry about it crashing as much. So if this is the sort of mod you want to make where you're just tweaking things or making little overhauls, XEdit is definitely going to be the best way to go for you. I will also, in the future, on top of showing you how to make new records, I'm definitely going to be covering how to do some scripting in XEdit, in particular running, even just the idea of running scripts, because there are some very big time savers you can do with XEdit. That's probably the most powerful part of it, is being able to run scripts. If you are a programmer, you can use Pascal to do some really insanely powerful stuff. All right, but in the meantime, this is something I'm not going to dive deep into for a while. I am going to focus most of my tutorials in the creation kit just because it's a little more user-friendly. It's easier to look at, and it's some of these things are excessive. It's just so much data to look at, so I find creation kit is just better for tutorials. But if you are interested in learning more of XEdit and don't want to wait for me, once again, I'm going to harp on the Gamer Poets videos. I would definitely go check those out. All right, and once again, we're going to close this out, and we're going to leave it checked in because we want to save our plugin. And now we've got a basic little plugin that edits the damage on the machete and the baseball bat. All right, guys, stay tuned for more tutorials. We'll definitely come back to XEdit in the future.